The Supreme Court of Japan. What role does it play in the judicial system of Japan? Please hit the subscribe button below. Hi everyone, welcome back to Japanese Politics 101. In this series, we talk about what makes up Japanese politics from the top all the way to the bottom. And Michael, we have been remiss in mentioning, or in failing to mention, the Japanese judiciary, including the Supreme Court.
Yeah, why haven't we talked about the judiciary?
In the foundation of Japanese politics, isn't there one of those blocks, a big block?
Like a branch of government?
Yes, like the judiciary, the entire judiciary, the Supreme Court. Why has that escaped our attention?
Well, it's because it's more of a twig than a branch. There is a ostensible separation of powers.
Right.
With the Diet is the legislative branch. The cabinet as a whole is the executive branch. The prime minister isn't the chief executive. He's just in charge of the cabinet. And then there's supposed to be a third branch of government, the judiciary. Now it's there. There are people who work in it. Mm-hmm. And they have courts and they have trials and they have procedures. But it is decidedly a vestigial and a very, very underdeveloped part of the Japanese political edifice.
Right. They don't even have original jurisdiction on matters of constitutional questions.
Well, they do and they don't. The Constitution of Japan was written very quickly. We can be entirely honest. It was written by Americans in about a week.
Right, a couple of days.
They had a few days, and they were pulling off books off the shelves in German and French from what was left of the library of Tokyo University, and pouring through and trying to figure out what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And then they got ideas from the U.S. And so the editing job wasn't terribly good, and that has left a lot of holes into which, in this case, the judicial branch has fallen. Mm-hmm. One of the primary statements in the Constitution is that the Diet is the supreme organ of power. And a little bit later on in Article 81, it then says the Supreme Court has the ability to judge the constitutionality of any ordinance, regulation, piece of legislation. Those two things cannot both be true. Mm-hmm. The Diet cannot be the ultimate unassailable power, and there can be judicial review.
Right.
And rather than fight for themselves, the judges have chosen, well, on occasion when they're given a question that's hard, they will just simply say, that's a political That's it. That's a political question. Right. It's not our business. Is it constitutional to have the self-defense forces? That's the Suzuki case. That's a political question, not our problem. Is the presence of the United States forces here in Japan a violation of there shall be no war material in Japan, Article 9 of the Constitution, the Sunakawa case? It's not a question we can answer. That's up to our elected representatives. Mm-hmm. It's at the top, the Supreme Court, 15 justices appointed by the Prime Minister, except for the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, who is ostensibly appointed by the Emperor. There are only two positions that are officially appointed by the Emperor, Prime Minister and head of the Supreme Court. Those 15
lifetime terms.
Those 15 justices, right. If you look at the Supreme Court website and you try to figure out what they did last year, mm-hmm. you would be appalled. In 2016, if you look at the records, interestingly, the decisions are all translated into English. So you can just look them up even if you don't speak Japanese, if you're an English speaker. There was, in 2016, at least on the website, there is one grand bench, 15 justices decision, and then they split up into what they call petty benches of 5 justices each to deal with something that is not an absolute constitutional question. And so there were about 35 decisions, but only one of them was of the entire bench. And each year, the number of times that all of the justices deliver a definitive statement of the Supreme Court is less than a handful.
Right.
You say, why do you have it if they decide so few questions? Mm-hmm. What's the point of this? And indeed, that's part and parcel to the entire judicial branch. And we should talk about where they come from and how they start.
Right. Well, you said the word definitive, and that's not a word that I would ascribe to anything that comes out of the Supreme Court or any of the justices. I mean, when was the last time any of them went on record and said something in a public venue?
Or was that was in any way comprehensible? One of the things you really learn when you look at the judicial branch is the onus is, when you're a career judge, to not rock the boat.
Right. To get up there. Right.
The English language name of the ministry is the Ministry of Justice. The Japanese language name, directly translated, is the Ministry of Law. And you have to have clear in your head the difference between those two things. You don't go into the Japanese court system finding justice. You will not find it there. You will have people who will be, shiho. Shiho is not, administer justice. It's administer law.
That's a great point. Right.
They're part of the entire prosecutorial, if it's criminal, and regulatory, if it's civil, apparatus.
Right.
Yes,
leafing through the book.
That's right. They're supposed to be independent, and there's if you become a judge, okay, first of all, they're not appointed. They're career judges. They start out, most of them, almost all of them come from the law department of Tokyo University, the faculty of law there. They're recruited. Half of the top of the graduating class gets put into the prosecutor's channel. The other half go into the judge's channel. And then there are people who go into private practice. That's true too. But and then of course a lot of them go into the ministries in various ways. But the top of the top go into either of those two, judging or prosecution. And indeed, the prosecution's probably a bit more prestigious than judging. The judges, they get in.
Well, it's a personality type too.
It's a personality type. These are people who are dead set on getting their pensions and not rocking the boat for the amount of time that they're sitting there. And they get they have a very hard 60 years of age, retirement age. There are no senior judges except on the Supreme Court. They're there to mark time and get through the process. Now, to keep them impartial, there is this really interesting migratory aspect to the judges. If you are a judge, a career judge, you start out in one place, and then you stay there only for a few years, and then you're farmed out to the other side of the country, or moved to the north, and they're moved every few blocks. They don't stay in one place. They don't develop personal friendships. They don't develop personal ties to the local area. They are kept impartial. Okay, great, that's perfect. But at the same time, they have no impetus to in any way endanger their getting their pension.
Right.
They have no interest in writing a truly revolutionary piece, a judgment that will overturn years of precedent. So again, when you go into the Japanese legal system, it's not a justice system. It's a legal system.
Right. I think one of the important things to point out here is that anybody who aspires to become a lawyer, first of all, they have to pass the test. It's not quite passing the bar, but it passes the test. You must pass the test to
It's a lot easier than it used to be.
Right.
It's a lot easier. They loosened the standards. It used to be fewer than 3% passed, over 90% failure rates on the legal test. So these are really smart cookies.
Right.
No question about it.
Right.
But it's their spirit.
Right.
It's their willingness to be brave and to do something truly that goes against the grain. That's entirely lacking.
Right. But the point I'm trying to make is that they all go, once they pass this test, it's not quite passing the bar, once they pass this test and get accepted into the Legal Institute, 2-year study, everybody comes out of that soup. Public prosecutors, judges, lawyers, judicial scriveners.
They know each other
lawyers,
personally.
It all comes out of one school.
It comes
and
out of
that's so huge.
Yeah, and so when you talk about impartiality, they have this, moving around. But at the end of the day, the person who is going to be sitting behind, up on the chair, and the prosecutor who's standing in front of them, they know each other.
Right.
They are close. They may not be personal friends, but they each know the past of
Until
the other.
the end of the war, they both sat on the same platform, and the defendant was, out with the masses.
Yeah, that at least is physical. That physical change has
Right.
happened, but nevertheless, the tie is there.
There's a spiritual tie there.
And so, what happens then is that when there is a case, and we can just slide a little bit of Carlos Ghosn in here.
Okay.
When a defendant says, "I'm not guilty," the judge is not going to say, "Well, that's a different opinion, and it's just as valid as the one that's brought by the prosecutors. I want to hear both sides equally." No,
you're sitting in front of me for a reason, dude. Right?
Yeah. That guy
there's
over
that pejorative.
there, I know he's a good guy because I've known him since.
I'm innocent.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
No.
And that the judicial system, therefore, when the conviction rate becomes quite clear.
Right.
The prosecutors not only, yes, there's a point that's made in all the articles. They cherry pick their cases so that they'll win.
It's true.
That's true. But equally so, they are a known for the judges, and the known aspect is always going to overwhelm whatever facts you may present.
They're part of the club. They're part of the prosecutorial area, and the defense lawyers are not. I mean, those are private lawyers. You have to hire them. They belong to a law firm.
They belong to something else.
Right.
Now, so they did come out of the question of coming out of the same pot. Mm-hmm. In terms of going back to the Supreme Court, why doesn't it do what it's supposed to do? Why doesn't it? Because the Americans, even though it was a rush job, they had in their minds what we cannot have is wait for Marbury versus Madison, Japan style. Mm-hmm. We have to write into the Constitution that the Supreme Court has the right to review all legislation and regulation and ordinances. That's not in the U.S. Constitution. That came through case law, through Marbury versus Madison. So the Americans put that in. Why don't the Japanese judges and justices, not only just in the Supreme Court, but throughout the system, use that and fight, inequality and unfairness like exists between rural districts and urban districts in the electoral system? Right. Why don't they do that? It's not just only their natural conservatism. It's because there's somebody else who does it. You can read about them. It's not like they're secret, but everybody forgets about them. The CLB, the Cabinet Legislation Bureau. They're bureaucrats who are plucked, handpicked by the people who are working already
from the cream of the crop. They're
the ones who take the cream off they're the cream that gets taken off the top, whether you're foreign ministry, whether you're Ministry of Finance. Yes, there's something above that, and that's the CLB. And the CLB is empowered through some mystical, magical way. It doesn't appear anywhere in the Constitution. And yet, nevertheless, it checks every piece of legislation, every bill that's going to be presented to the Diet by the government, passes through under the eyes of the CLB, and they look at it, they criticize it, they take pieces out, they correct your grammar, they do anything they want to it, and then they put a stamp, this is going to be constitutional. And then it's passed back to the politicians to then pass in the Diet. The CLB is it pre-digests, checks for constitutionality, everything the government does, so that the Supreme Court doesn't have to do anything. The as the statistic people say, and I'm not sure how it works, but that has been only one case where the justices of the Supreme Court have invalidated a CLB-approved bill. Otherwise, that became law. Otherwise, it's done already, and it's done extra-constitutionally. So the Supreme Court, the court system, is atrophied.
Right.
And the power lies within the ministries.
Well, it seems like this shift has continued for 20, 30 years, this slow accumulation of power that's going into the Prime Minister's office and into the government portion, kind of disregarding the judicial branch altogether.
And even the CLB, it has been cut down to size under the Abe administration. Mr. Abe, when he came in, said, I'm going to change who's the head of the CLB.
Right.
And everybody went, oh! Don't you know the CLB is always recruited internally? The deputy head always becomes the head. That's always the way it's been. And Mr. Abe said, I don't care. I'm going to take this head of the CLB, I'm going to put him on the Supreme Court where he can't do any damage, and I'm going to put my own guy in, and bingo, what had previously been unconstitutional, collective security, suddenly became, when Mr. Abe's man was there, suddenly constitutional after 60 years of naysaying.
That was a hot time in the city, wasn't it?
That was a hot time. Street protests, the country erupted. Everyone said that was dirty pool, and he got away with it.
Right. The Supreme Court of Japan plays a very minor role in this whole hierarchy that comprises Japanese politics as we have been discussing it. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope that this teaches you something about how this whole system works or doesn't work. Please stay tuned. Hi everyone, thanks for watching this last episode. Please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and help us proliferate this channel.